And we'll get started. Thank you all for coming today. We're going to be talking about acquisitions in Evergreen. We have three guests today speaking. We have Tiffany Little from, and I'm probably going to get your official title wrong, Acquisition Specialist at Pines, which is in Georgia. We have Jennifer Prinkle from the Co-op Support from BC Libraries. So she's up early for us over in the British Columbia area. And we have Brent. Brent, I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name. I'm so sorry.
Answer.
Enser. And he is at the Adams County Library System. So I'm going to hand it over to them to get started. Katie, did you have any words you want? Okay. All right, I'll share my screen and we can get started. Okay. Okay, so here are our presenters again. And basically, what is acquisitions in Evergreen?
Okay, I think I had outlined who was going to go first and then I forgot. So I guess it's me. So all three of us work with acquisitions, obviously. I don't work with acquisitions directly, like I'm not in a library, I'm like consortial support. But I support 13 library systems currently, and they're all really different. So I have sort of like a broad overview of acquisitions. So would you advance one for me, Elizabeth? Awesome. Okay. So basically, acquisitions is putting your ordering process for your materials into Evergreen. It's basically taking the process that you already do, which is order items, and putting it into like this framework that the computer, that the ILS understands, and that you can get information then back out of. So we always have the top level of ordering stuff, which we still order stuff, and the invoicing part. But acquisitions adds in these things kind of like on the side, which you may be doing in some other manner, like you may be using like a spreadsheet, or for like patron requests, you might be using, I had one library that was using like 3x5 cards, like at the desk or whatever. So you may already be doing these in some form or fashion. This just puts them all in kind of like a bundle for you. And I don't know who I said this analogy to the other day, but I like it, and so I'm keeping it. It's the Build-A-Bear for Evergreen. If you want the super fancy tuxedo bear, then you can add on all the extras. But if you want just bare bones, he's a bear, then you can do that too. So because acquisitions is optional, you can kind of build what you want, essentially. So this little graph here is that we have the ordering process, and then these are, like I said, these things on the side are things that you can sort of optionally add in if that's something that you're interested in. So like fund tracking, if you want to close to real time track your funds, like instead of your spreadsheet, then you can do that in Evergreen. So basically it's like, as soon as I order, my stuff is encumbered. As soon as I get my invoice, it's considered spent. And I know what stage of the process each of those things are in. So same thing with item tracking. You know, I ordered it. Has it come in yet? Have we received it here? Do we have the physical thing? Which is really nice. When you get your invoices, we're not paying for things that we don't have in hand. And then same thing with like patron requests and honor to holds. That's putting that into like a process. There's a predefined process that we can go through instead of it being maybe scattered across different people or doing it differently or whatever. And accountability is everybody, it tracks rather, not lacks, everybody who does a particular thing. So that's accountability. And then just the last piece is if you would like to integrate Evergreen with your vendor, where we send them orders and they send us back invoices and acknowledgements, you can do that too. So Each of these pieces is optional. We just build our bear with the pieces that are useful to us. We don't have to have tuxedo bear every single time. We just have regular bear. So, and then the sum of all that is this is all data in Evergreen, which means it's all data that we pull back out in reports if we so choose. So if you put it in, you can pull it back out. But if we never put it into Evergreen at all, we never use acquisitions, obviously you can't. So that's my summary of this little slide. Jennifer or Brant, do you have anything that you want to say on those?
Well, I do, just from to go one step further with your Build-A-Bear analogy. We in Adams County use everything on the screen except for on order holds tracking. And the reason we don't use that is because we were hearing about issues about it at the time. Now that was several versions ago, so those could very well have been fixed, and we need to retry it. But what the thinking behind it was, when we were deciding to switch, was these were all things we were doing in our other legacy ILS that was TLC, and we weren't going to be moving to anything that didn't do this, because it would make my job trying to make sure the funds are spent and their stuff is coming in. And I saw my coworker Annette is on as well, who does the receiving and the cataloging side of this process. It would be difficult for, if you have more than one person in the process, to do it without it. So we have found that I think for a while we had the distinction of being the only one who fully used it in Pennsylvania. I think there's some others have joined us, but it really does work as advertised, and you can find everything that you need and then some.
And I'll just add to that. I think I can safely say that Tiffany and I both learned the hard way that you really don't need to use every single piece of acquisitions if you don't need that functionality. If you need that functionality, you definitely want to use it. And if you're coming from a system where you already are using those, I mean, you don't want to lose functionality. But I think both Tiffany and I, in the early days, tended to train libraries on every single possible thing you could do in acquisitions. And acquisitions can do a lot. So really, as you work with acquisitions, figuring out what workflows you want, what pieces you want to use is really important. And when thinking about whether acquisitions is the right fit for you, thinking about whether, having multiple people, as Brant said, being able to do the same functions is important, because Evergreen does track it so that you can see what other people have done in a way that possibly your Excel spreadsheet doesn't. And one thing for us with the vendor integration was the automation of using EDI, which is electronic data interchange, to be able to send purchase orders to the vendors and then have them send the invoices back. It made a big difference in time and actually saving time for our libraries. When we first went live with our first library, EDI wasn't an option in Evergreen, and manually creating invoices makes a significant difference in the amount of time you spend in acquisitions.
And if I could say one more thing about, I love EDI, and I grumble at the one or two smaller places we purchase that does not do EDI. This goes back to one of the questions we asked on the pre-questionnaire before today that you filled out. Every situation is going to be different. So in Pennsylvania, we have very small I call them one horse libraries, And then we have systems, and then we have groups of systems that work together in a consortium or district or however they want to call it. So acquisitions can be used very differently for very different purposes. I'll use my example here in Adams County. We have centralized ordering. We have 6 branches that we order for. Everything gets shipped into here in Gettysburg, our main facility, to be processed. But I have people all over the county ordering and sending in orders. So, and you know, some books start here, some books start there. Some books need a book plate in it, so you can make that note in there so the cataloger sees it. So ours is not real complex, but it does have a lot of variables in it. And that is beneficial use of acquisitions too, if you're in a multi-branch or multi-library situation.
And just to build off that, there's a feature in acquisitions called worksheets. And so every line item has a worksheet that is built as it goes through the process and includes, information about the shelving location it's going into, when it was received, and it also includes things, it can include alerts, so notes, as well as counts of holds. And it can be really useful because it replaces what I think a lot of libraries use Post-it notes for on the book. And the big difference is if you lose the worksheet that goes with the book, you can print another copy, or you can go into Evergreen and take a look, instead of, searching for that Post-it that has dropped off the book with the essential information about, the special thing that was supposed to happen to it. So it's one of those pieces where having that information in the system where it can be re-retrieved as needed can be very useful.
Sorry if the dog is barking. He just went after something. I was going to say, as far as having multiple people, one other thing that, and your libraries may not be set up like this, but is that usually there's one person who has the numbers, like as far as funds. And a lot of times they would have, other people would have to say, Jane, how much money do I have? And it would change, it would be changing all the time. So the numbers that Jane gave today are not the same numbers that they're going to be in a couple of days. So when all of your money is tracked and as far as like what's encumbered and spent and just how much you have to spend, when all of that is in one central place that's sort of managed by the system, you don't have to do that. And even if you still want Jane to be dispensing those numbers, because we don't necessarily want everybody in there, then that's still okay, because Jane can just print it out for them and it's up to date. So especially with funds, it's really nice if you have multiple people that are responsible for things. It's just to have it in one spot.
Yeah, and that works even if all of my people don't have the admin access to see the funds. So I do once a month, I just did it yesterday, pull out the information into a spreadsheet and share that with the group. So they have that number updated at least once a month. So again, that goes back to the thing of, you find a way to make it work for you, but allow the system to work for you.
And with that kind of information can be pulled out as a report as well. So in theory, you could set up a recurring report that automatically emails to the relevant people and not even need to manually pull out information. I think it gets harder, Tiffany, if you're wanting to pull out specific fund information as opposed to just do a report on your current state of everything. But I feel like that's a potential use for the very underused fund tags that over the years we've both tried to use, but we haven't quite figured out how to make them useful. And there was a question in the chat, can this be used for e-resource vendors as well? In the BC Libraries Co-op, our libraries don't track or don't load their don't load their e-resource records themselves, but they could, through the invoicing functionality, track how much they're spending on different resources. I don't know, Tiffany, if you have any libraries that are actually loading e-resources through AC.
We don't actually batch load any e-resource records at all. So yeah, we do have libraries that, like you said, they do fund track their e-resources. So they'll have a vendor set up for Overdrive, and they'll make an invoice that says, you know, on Jan 1, we spent X amount with Overdrive for e-resources, and they can track it that way, but they're not tracking necessarily like the items that they're purchasing for e-resources.
And in the chat, it's saying, curious more about tracking spending. And that's one of the great pieces with Evergreen, is that you can create invoices that aren't actually attached to a purchase order. So you don't have to create a purchase order for something that you're not actually going to physically receive or need to track. If you are wanting to track what you're spending with different vendors for e-resources, you can just create invoices for that. Some of our libraries will create invoices at the end of the year if they go out, you know, to the bookstore and buy a whole bunch of books with the money they have left before the end of their fiscal year. And then they'll just create an invoice for that saying, you know, we bought 12 books using the adult fiction fund, we bought 50 using the children's fund, and then send those items into just into regular cataloging, as opposed to manually creating a purchase order to include every single item. Because when you have the items physically in front of you, it's not really worth your time to go back to the PO step.
And we do actually upload we use Cloud Library here in Adams County. And we do upload our records to batch once a month to the catalog. And we also use it for the tracking spending as well. The thing about that, if you're uploading them for your patrons to use, it does provide a link right to the audiobook or the ebook. But you also have to make sure you delete things that have been, you know, that have run its course over time or number of checkouts or what have you, because that can be very confusing. And we learned that lesson the hard way last year. But be prepared, at least Cloud Library does not do EDI. Biblioteca does not do EDI. So at the end of the month, I'm sitting there typing in hundreds of dollar amounts and praying that it comes out at the end. So, and I'm not sure about Overdrive, but my guess would be, since you're not actually ordering them in Spark, they probably don't use EDI either. That was a good question, though.
Yeah. I unmuted to say it and then I forgot. Oh, I was going to say, if fund tracking and tracking your money is something that is of interest to you, something that I always tell libraries who are interested in acquisitions, if that's what they're into, is you have to put everything into acquisitions to trust your budget. Now that doesn't mean it's all like we were saying, it doesn't mean that we have to make a big purchase order for everything or whatever. It just means that it needs to be there. So if you go to the bookstore, like Jennifer was saying, make an invoice. I spent $100 at the bookstore. Otherwise, your budget is $100 off. So it doesn't have to be a big thing, but just know that if you are going to try and track your funds accurately in acquisitions, everything needs to be reflected there. So that's something to think about, because sometimes people will say, well, do I need to put like my Amazon orders in there? And I'm like, yeah, you do, because you spent the money at Amazon. So that's just something to think about if you're interested in that.
Yeah, we don't buy one thing that does not go through acquisitions. Actually, all of our donations, the ones that we add, also go through, because it gives it allows us to upload the MARC record, but it also gives us a number for the auditors at the end of the year who like to know what comes in donations.
Well, and one piece that we haven't really talked about is that Evergreen does have year-end functionality. So when you come to the end of your fiscal year, there is a process that you can do to either roll over your money and your encumbrances to your next fiscal year, or for us, most of our libraries only roll over their encumbrances, and any unspent money goes back to their funding sources. But it helps you, track where you're at the end of the year. And there are reports that we have libraries run so that they can catch where things, have either been invoiced but didn't actually get received in the system, or vice versa. So that at the end of your year, you have a solid picture of where your acquisitions ended and where you're going to start with the next year. And as Tiffany said, if you're not entering, for instance, your Amazon orders, when you go to run year end and you look at your funds, your numbers will not match what you expect them to. So it's, and if you, are missing a step, like, you haven't invoiced an entire, you haven't closed an entire invoice, you could look at your funds and be like, I'm, $300 out. What's going on here? So the year-end process is really good for, making libraries stop at the end of the year, make sure everything still makes sense before you start your next fiscal year. And with the new fund administration interface that came in, I want to say 3.8, we got it in 3.9, but I think it actually came in 3.8. Year end, the process, it didn't really change, but the look of it did, and it's just a lot easier now. And I'll just, because I've talked about the fund administration, I'll just mention that there's currently a lot of work going on to angularize acquisitions. In 3.10, we get the purchase order and line items in angularized. And in future versions, we're going to have things like invoices and claiming and other pieces angularized. So you will see acquisitions change, I think in some substantial ways, at least how it looks over the next, I'd say, several years. So, 6-7 release cycles, which is excellent because if you have looked at acquisitions, it's currently using the code that was written for the desktop client of Evergreen. So it's definitely due for the update. So you will do be prepared as you use acquisitions to see things change a bit over the next several releases. And we're really excited that you're going to 3.11 as well, because so are we this fall.
Yes. And I will share that for those of you who are interested in trying out acquisitions, we can set up the test server, but we are strongly encouraging you to hold out until the beginning of 2024 so that we can get you on the new, nice, streamlined pages. So this fall and this summer, as we're testing 3.11, you'll get to see those screens as well. So.
And I'll add on to that. And then there was a question in chat I wanted to answer. So I have on our Pines wiki page, some libraries ask me, and this may depend on you guys, if they can just try acquisitions, like try it for real, but try it. And so my thing personally is, if you're going to try it, don't just try it for a month and be like, I don't like this, because you haven't really gone through the full life cycle of an order, right? When you just order it. And so I usually tell people to try it for 3 to 6 months. If you don't like it after that, then okay. But like, if you actually think about what ordering is like, ordering kind of takes a long time generally, like we order it and it might be back ordered and we might not get it for a while, and then we get the invoice, and they have to be received. So just knowing that if you like want to try it for real, like in production in real, then it's not a, you know, we try it and then like a week later I'm like, no, I don't like this. So so just something to think about if you think about that. And then there was a question someone sent to me in chat. Can you list some of the main vendors that use EDI? And I keep a list of the ones that I particularly know about, and I'm positive there are ones out there that I don't. But the ones that I have on my list are Baker and Taylor, Blackstone, Rodart, Ingram, Midwest Library Service, and then Midwest Tape. And like I said, I'm sure there are more out there that I just don't know about, but those are the ones that I know that do EDI.
We also have ULS and White Hots, but as those are Canadian companies, I suspect the majority of you are probably not ordering from those two. And I have not come across any off Tiffany's list, I have not come across any additional ones that aren't already on Tiffany's list.
And if anyone has any pull with Gale or Cengage or Thorndike, any of the large print publishers, we would love for them to do EDI.
And the other piece to talk about when we talk about EDI is a lot of the vendors, and I think all of the ones on Tiffany's list, though Tiffany, correct me if I'm wrong, will do holdings information in the MARC records that you get. So you can have them include shelving location, circulation modifier, fund, which is the big one, and price. And so when you upload the MARC records from the vendor to create your purchase order in Evergreen, it pre-populates your fund, your shelving location, your price, which can make a really big difference when you're loading a purchase order of 100 line items, for instance, or, you know, loading 7 orders each of 100. Because it can take a lot of time to go through and manually put in even just the price for every single line item. So for vendors that you're working with that do offer the holding subfields, strongly recommend taking them up on that. And Evergreen, you can tell Evergreen what subfields that information is coming in. At the co-op, we have standardized what we would like libraries to ask their vendors to use, so that the information is coming in the same field, so that, you know, if troubleshooting needs to happen, you know, the price is always in a subfield E for estimated price. But definitely, as you're working with vendors, something to make sure you include in your conversation, because having that holdings information in the MARC record makes a huge difference as to how much time your acquisitions processes will take you. And it's all about saving time. I mean, part of the reason to use acquisitions is to, you know, get it automated, but also, you know, have some time savings for staff in those processes.
And 2, ask them not just do they offer the holdings information, but do they offer MARC records at all? Because sometimes, and when I was first getting started, I kind of conflated the two things, but MARC records and EDI are not the same thing, and they are not related at all. Like, you could have a vendor that offers MARC records, but they don't do EDI at all, and that's okay. Usually the ones that do EDI offer also MARC, because they're usually the big ones. But the point is that they are not related. And I will wager to say, personally, I think whether they offer the records is more important, because that is the time saver. That is, I push the button to upload and it pre-populates my beautiful purchase order with my titles, my prices, holdings information if they have it. And even if they don't, it still does titles, you know, price, quantity, things like that, versus I have to type it all in my hand, which I don't want to. So it's more important to me if they offer MARC downloads. And we have later on, we have a slide for like resources, and on that page is the link to the Pines Wiki, which is, I'm just looking at it, so that's why I keep referencing it. But on I have like a chart of who offers EDI, and then do they also offer MARC downloads. So So that's there if that's useful for that as well.
Shall I advance?
Sure.
Okay. It's
I
kind of
think
what
we
we've been
just
talking
covered all
about.
that.
Are there any questions in general on something that maybe we talked about or that we haven't mentioned yet? Give everybody a minute to type if they're typing. I will go to the next
I was gonna say all, which is a
one, which is
you
question.
for asking the question. I'll just mention that in our consortium, we found that the majority of our libraries have two basic workflows, and most of their main vendors do both MARC records, withholding subfields, and EDI. And our two main vendors offer both on order records as well as shelf ready records. So libraries either get the brief record or they get the brief record and then the full record later. And so for libraries that are using those records, they're going to their vendor's website, they're creating their basket, they're then downloading the MARC file. The important thing here is don't upload your records into Evergreen and activate your purchase order, and then go back to your vendor's website and order that basket or cart, because you will have placed two orders for the same thing, and you don't want to do that. So they load their MARC file into Evergreen. It gets sent off to the vendor via EDI. They receive the box. Box often will contain an assortment from different purchase orders. So they'll go to the invoice and they'll receive the items through the invoice, make sure everything's there. The EDI invoice that the vendor sent matches the paper invoice, and then close their invoice. And then the other workflow that they will often do is if they are ordering from someone like Amazon, those they will do as invoices. They won't do purchase orders. They'll just start at the invoice stage and create an invoice when they either order or receive the Amazon order, to say how much is being spent. And then when that order arrives, if they've created the invoice ahead, they'll then close that invoice. So they've got those two main workflows that kind of cover, I'd say 98-99% of the ordering that our libraries do. And we do have in our documentation, which is in the resources, we do have the different workflows that our libraries use laid out in our manual. And there's a question in the chat that I think Elizabeth is one for you.
Yeah, so the question is what training and support is offered if you decide, depending on which component, or if you're using that will continue with the Build-A-Bear. If you're going for the full deluxe tuxedo fancy bear, obviously we will be walking you through the process, setting everything up, because there is a little bit of setup on the back end that we have to do, especially for the EDI if you decide to go that route, and testing, and then we will provide support and training for the components that you're going to be using. Jennifer has mentioned in the past that, if you're going, I think, full bear, full tuxedo bear, it could be up to 10 hours. We haven't clocked it yet, but it is a time investment that you'll want to long-term save time. So I just want to make sure everyone is cognizant of that, for most libraries, it will require some training. So I hope that answers your question.
And I assume, depending on where you are in the state, someone who's using it locally could come and sit with you and walk you through it. And that's what York County did that for us, even though they didn't use the full version, they used most of it and could get us started at least. And, you know, they invited us over, then they came over here the day we went live. And so that's, I'm sure, available too, depending on where you're at.
Yep. Either we'll have a local community library visit, or Katie, Catherine, or I will visit in person. So.
And just to echo what Elizabeth said, you know, you really do want to be prepared that it's going to take some time. There's going to be training involved because acquisitions does have a lot of moving pieces. Even if you're not using the full Tuxedo Build-A-Bear, there's still, you know, some significant pieces in it to learn how to use. Don't want to scare anybody off because acquisitions, you know, it makes sense. There's lots of documentation on it. There's lots of support for it, you know, within your own consortium as well as the greater Evergreen community. But it is a good idea to go into acquisitions being aware that this is a significant piece of Evergreen. When we do training with new libraries on acquisitions, we found in the past that we spend about as much time training as we do when we bring in a new library on the rest of Evergreen. So, you know, we'll spend 10 hours doing, you know, circulation, reports, cataloging overall, and then we'll do 10 hours just on acquisitions. I think we've pared that back to about 6 hours now. But it is a significant chunk, and you do want to be prepared going in to commit that time. And as you have test servers available, to going in and trying things out. Evergreen is a lot more forgiving now than it used to be. And it's possible to reverse things. So if you accidentally allocate $200,000 instead of $20,000, you can now reverse that in the staff client. But it's always good to, you know, work on a test system for a little bit and get those kind of things out on the test system so that you are less likely to come to your live system and accidentally allocate $200,000 to your adult fiction, unless you have $200,000 to spend on your adult fiction. So, you know, definitely, you know, take advantage of test systems if you have those available to you.
And also, depending on how Elizabeth and Katie do the training, not everybody needs the 10 hours. If you're going to have somebody who's just going to receive, they don't need to know how to set up funds and, you know, necessarily, because they're not going to do that. So there's some poor person who does get the short end of the stick and they've got to know the whole thing. But it's depending on what your setup is. Not every single person needs every single piece. And so that depends on how you guys do that. I was going to say something else. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say we did get some, I got some direct questions. There is no additional cost to use the acquisitions module in Spark. So if you are interested and want to chat, we can walk you through what your workflows are and how you want to use the components to build your bear, if you will. We're gonna run this analogy into the ground. I hope you all know. So yes, if you just want to have an informal conversation and we can kind of chat about your workflows and see what options work best for you. Again, as everyone has been stressing, you can use a component, like you could track spending, or you could use just the on order records, or you know, you could use the whole thing. So, or you could start with one, like you could start with fund tracking 1 year and then add on another component the next year. So don't feel like you have to go all the way in.
And if you're finding that there's things that aren't working quite the way you expect, or if you wish something would work differently, it's one of the beauties of Evergreen. And I'm not sure how in Spark reporting would happen that way, but being able to report things to Launchpad when they're not working, or when you wish something would work slightly different, or when you need a new feature or function to be able to do something. We're keeping a close eye on the patron request functionality because it doesn't quite work in the way that we need it to yet with the way our consortium is set up. But just the ability to, know that things can change and features can, expand or change over time, so that it, it works for you the way you need it to, is, I think, one of the great strengths of Evergreen. We might want to push forward to the resource slide just because I want to mention we do have the acquisitions interest group, which meets once a month. The next meeting, Tiffany very helpfully put on here, is on March 8th. And everybody is welcome to that, whether you're using acquisitions or you're just interested in acquisitions. We usually have a presentation each month on something related to acquisitions. So if you're still thinking about whether or not acquisitions is for you, it's a great place to come and just learn more about acquisitions and hear me and Tiffany and others talk about what we're doing with acquisitions, what issues people have encountered. And you can, come and just listen if that's, what you want. Or, we encourage people to speak up and ask questions as well as they have them. So just a plug for the interest group.
And the March meeting, if I remember my my little calendar, is actually about patron requests. And I am actually angularizing that interface, and I would say it's like 80% done. So I'm actually going to be doing the presentation in the March meeting. So if that's something that you are interested in, then you are more than welcome. We would love to have anybody come. And just like Jennifer was saying, if you want to come and just lurk, that's fine too. We always have like a time at the end for just like open discussion for people to like ask questions and stuff. So yeah. And what was I gonna say? Oh, so on the, like I was saying, I had the Pines wiki. That's that second one, the Pines documentation. That is for Pines. That's my documentation. And on that page, if you click it, and you don't have to click it, but if you do, then I actually have like a, what do you call those things? A flow chart. If you want to kind of see like the possible, like how things go. Yeah, so there you go. That's my little flow chart. So if you want to kind of get an idea of like the process of like how things move. So it's hopefully helpful.
That's good.
So, and it's color coded, but I didn't mark that it's color coded. So nobody really grokked onto that. But like the blue parts are things that I, the user, do. So like I, the user, decide what I'm going to order and create my carts. And then I do the upload. Like, so the top line, those are the things that I do. And then yellow is something the vendor does, and green is something that Evergreen does just automatically. So it breaks it out into what am I doing? Because this can look, if you look at this and you're like, oh my gosh, there's so much I have to do, then no, not really. It's not all you. So, but if that's helpful for sort of breaking down what the process might look like. And for each one of these steps, like Jennifer was saying with like receiving on the invoice, there's like 4 different ways to receive something. So that's why I didn't necessarily put in a particular like workflow, because there's always like different ways to do a particular thing pretty much. So
and something to remember that we said earlier that I really fits here is, here in Adams County, we probably have 3 main people who are in this process somewhere. So it's not one person's responsibility. Actually, from an accounting standpoint, it's probably better that it's not one person's responsibility. So you have to think of what the workflow is that you're using now, or any possible changes that you could make to more align with that. And the one thing I will mention, we mentioned it very briefly earlier, the end of the year process has been revolutionary for me. I can't tell you how many items we used to take over from year to year and then realize they were never coming in because they didn't ship. Or so now I start in mid-December, I start the process of seeing what's coming in, what's been pushed back, what's been canceled, and it makes that thing go so much smoother. And we were saying, give yourself 3 or 4 months. I always say you have to give yourself a year, because there's certain things like the end of the year thing that you're only going to do once a year. And the first 2 years I tried to do it were treacherous and did not go well. And finally, I think it was Tiffany who was the poor soul who had to get us to do it correctly. But the last 2 years, because even Equinox couldn't help us. But the last 2 years, I've been able to do it myself, and I'm so proud of that. And it does flow a lot better now in the update, so that's also helpful. But don't give up on it.
And like, work backwards when you decide what you want to add. So like, what is my end goal? Like, is my end goal, I want to track my funds. Okay, well then we'll add that piece onto the bear. Like, not what do I do now, because what you do now might not be really what you want to see on the other side. Like, so I want to see my funds. I want to see, on order holds. Okay, well then let's fit that. Let's make our bear with that. You know what I mean? So don't necessarily think from here, start at the end and work backwards when you're deciding if it will work and if what you want to do.
Yeah, and we always try to bring it back around to the service perspective as well, right? So I want to know what it is that people want me to buy, and I don't want to have a dozen sticky notes of who gets what when it comes in. Then acquisitions can really help with that. Or getting the orders from the libraries and the selection list is such a pain, and I want to, kind of streamline that process so that the librarians spend less time on ordering so they can do more other things. What's the outcome exactly?
And with many other parts of Evergreen, starting to use the acquisitions module can give you that moment to pause and decide, what you want your workflows to be now, as opposed to trying to fit old workflows into how Evergreen does it, which some of you may have experienced, just with, coming to circulation or cataloging in Evergreen.
So
And Elizabeth, were there other questions?
There was another question about those who are interested in proceeding forward, having live demos. And we have a survey that'll go out when this session is over. And if you would, there's a question asking, do you want to proceed to testing components? And if you could indicate on the survey, we'll reach out to you to set up that chat and demo whatever component you want to move forward with, or evaluate if you want to move forward with. So
yeah, I was gonna say, you don't have to commit, but if you'd like to, talk with a library that we have some libraries that just do the purchase orders, purchase requests. So we could kind of do some matchmaking if anybody wants to see particular parts of the bear.
yep. See if that, that ascot matches the vest.
There you go.
And the tuxedo. I will add, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, in the resources here at the bottom, I included a link to the 2022 conference presentation that Tiffany and I did. What we wish we knew then, all the things that, over the years we wish we learned, we knew when we started. And if I'm remembering correctly, Tiffany, because 2022 was a long time ago now, we had some screenshots and possibly some live demoing in there. I can't remember what we did, but
think we
if
did.
you, yeah, if you take a look at that, it gives, some tips and tricks about things that you want to think about or avoid, some of which I think we've talked about today, but also shows some pieces of Evergreen to start with in the acquisitions module.
Oh, and last thing, we were talking about the AC interest group meetings. So we've started recording those and uploading them to YouTube. So we have like the very ugly like YouTube link playlist there. So if you want to watch any of the previous ones to kind of get an idea of what the meetings are like before you come to one.
And Tiffany, do we have anywhere on the interest group meetings, either in the recording description or on the wiki, to indicate what presentations happen in different ones?
It's on the wiki for each meeting, and then I also put it in the description for the video itself.
So yeah, so if there's particular topics you're interested in, some of those have been presented on in the acquisitions meetings.
I will say that acquisitions meetings are very fun and I have learned a lot. So I highly encourage those who are interested in learning more about it. You also get a say on how some things are laid out. So you can contribute comments, and that's been very fun.
That's actually exactly why I'm presenting the patron requests, because I'm going to ask people if how I've done something is bad. So there you go.
And I think you were going to put it on the next screen, has our emails on it. Certainly feel free to email me if you like. I'm the one on the top there. I'd be happy to talk about all the goods and all the bads and the times I cried. And no, I didn't cry. There were
It'd be
some
okay.
times where I was ready to throw the computer across the room, but I didn't cry. So
Yeah.
Well, and one of the things that the sort of starting point for scheduling this conversation is that we don't right now in our consortial staff have as much native experience with this. I'm the cataloger, and I'd never worked in a system that used acquisitions. So Elizabeth has leveled up her skills substantially in learning a bunch of it, and we very much appreciate our libraries that do use it, because they've sort of helped us, and Equinox has helped us to start to be able to support it better. And we of course lean on Equinox when we need to, and the community when we need to. And so one of the things that we can offer to our libraries is say, you come to us and you tell us, well, this is what I want the end outcome to be. As Tiffany was saying, this is my goal. And then we can try to crowdsource the things that we don't know already in order to help you achieve that.
And the community is very, I think, encouraging and supportive of libraries using acquisitions, because the more libraries that use acquisitions, the more the functionality gets developed, the more support there is out there. As far as I know, one of our libraries was the very first library to use acquisitions in Evergreen back in 2011.
Cool.
And to have multiple consortia and libraries across Evergreen using acquisitions now, it's very different from the beginning when it was just us, and it's much nicer now to have all of the support and everybody else in the community with acquisitions knowledge. So definitely very encouraging of anybody wanting to try and use acquisitions, because it just makes our community better.
and we finished 4 minutes early.
Yeah, I was going to say we're coming up on the hour, and I don't want to hold our anyone past. So if there aren't any other questions, I'd like to thank Brant, Tiffany, and Jennifer for taking the time to chat with us today. And I hope you all have a good Valentine's Day. I forgot it was Valentine's Day until just now.
during the recording of this, an email came up on my email. There's leftover Valentine's Day cake in the
Oh,
staff room. So my vision was not directly on the meeting when I saw it.
You're looking across the hallway, seeing if
Yeah.
there's a mad rush or not.
so, well, thank you all, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
You.
Thank you.
Thank you.